All right, Devin's got us recording. We're going to start in just a minute or two. Excellent. Great to see everybody.
Great.
Welcome, welcome. If you can, please go into the chat and sign in.
We're going to go into chat.
If you're a guest of somebody, please go ahead and sign in. Write that you're a guest. We have one half of the Mustin duo in sight.
The other one's tardy.
That's okay, we won't hold it again.
Mark him tardy. Mark tardy.
Okay.
You're tardy.
All right, glad to see everybody joining.
Yeah.
President Barb,
Yes?
if we did as they do, for example, in the AM Club, we could have a happy buck for Steve Schomburg, who is in the Press Citizen.
Exactly. Is Steve with us today?
Yes, he's on.
Oh, there he is. I see him.
I don't know that he heard that, but
I know he's logging in. I keep seeing his fingers on his iPad.
there we go.
So, Steve, if I wanted to call on you for just a brief summary of why you're in the paper, are you willing?
Sure.
Okay, I'll do that. Just kind of remember, keep it brief. We got lots of things to do. Okay, so with that, we are going to get started. So welcome everybody. My name is Barb Thomas and I am your president for the 2021 Rotary year. And as we always do, we start our meeting with a Pledge of Allegiance. So please stand if you can and join me for the pledge.
You lot bellies.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
One nation,
Under God.
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we ask that if possible that you mute your microphone so that we don't have a lot of background noise while we are starting. As we tend to do, you know, we're all becoming big Zoom experts, but just in case you're kind of new to that, I'm going to turn it over to Devin, who's just going to give us a few quick Zoom reminders. Devin?
Yes, thanks, President Barb. So a couple of quick Zoom reminders. One, if you've been here, you've probably signed into the chat. You can also have conversations there. But if you haven't seen it before, there's a chat button somewhere on either on the bottom of your screen if you're on your computer or on some sort of menu if you're on a mobile device. And you can use that to sign in for attendance and chat with people throughout the meeting. You can also look at participants and see who else is here. And within the participants tab, there is a way to raise your hand. And that's really useful when it comes time for announcements, or if you have a guest, or if you have questions at the end of the program. And the final thing that I'll say is that there's an option to change between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view allows you to see the person who's speaking front and center, big picture. The gallery view allows you to see everybody in kind of a paneled situation. So right now it's good to have gallery view so you can see everybody's responses to how well or terribly I'm doing this, funny faces, that sort of thing. But when it comes time for the speaker or when Barb's talking, it's nice to have it on speaker view so you can really see what they're saying. And one thing that we have learned when a presentation is up, like during our presenter today, what you'll want to do is make sure that when you're seeing what they're presenting, there's also a tab with whoever's speaking, and you'll want to go and find Jason, who's our presenter today, so that you can see his face along with the presentation. And that's all I've got today. Back to you, President Barb.
Perfect. Thanks, Devin. So follow those simple tips, and that way you'll be able to kind of see our program front and center. So with that, we want to make sure that any of our guests are able to be introduced. So if you have a guest and want to introduce them, or if you are a guest and would like to be introduced or a visiting Rotarian, please go to that participants button that Devin mentioned and raise your hand, and then Devin will actually call on you to be presented. So I'm going to hand it back to Devin for those introductions.
Yep.
Devin?
Thanks, President Barb. Ryan Bell has his hand raised. I think you have a guest or two.
I have two guests actually today. I'm privileged to have both my mom and my mother-in-law joining us. They're both aficionados of the nature scenes in Iowa City. So whenever they come to visit, they're always quick to find a trail or a photo opportunity.
Great. Welcome to both of you. Doris, Preucil, you have a guest.
My guest is my husband, Bill.
Hi.
Welcome, Bill. Good to see
Hey,
you.
Bill, good to see you.
All right. Those are all the guests. I know we have our perpetually visiting Rotarian from Vail, Colorado, Gary Wickland. He's not actually in Vail. He's sitting next to his wife in Coralville somewhere. Anybody else that we missed or you weren't able to raise your hand? All right. Back to you, President Barb.
Great. Thank you, Devin. So it's my understanding that our Rotarian, Steve Schomburg, was in the paper today. So Steve, do you want to just give us a brief little update as to why you were in the paper?
Sure. Thank you, President Barb. As Gary indicated, I'm one of the writers that routinely contribute to the community music column. And today was my day to be published, which is always fun to do. And the topic was around my experience in learning to make a beautiful sound on a tuba, but also the process of what a great opportunity in Iowa City for retirees to play music through the New Horizons Band. Thank you.
That's great. You know, Steve, you might have to be careful because we might ask you to play your tuba for some meeting sometime. So
I would like to bring my quintet sometime, yes.
Ooh.
We were planning to do that when we had our New Horizons anniversary, but of course that got canceled, as Devin knows, because of COVID, but maybe next year.
Have you guys ever played via Zoom? Or is that challenging?
No, that's a problem because of the sound qualities of Zoom,
Right.
but.
That makes sense. Well, good. Good. Thanks. And we should all, and that was a Press Citizen today. Is that right? Or the correct?
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Press Citizen Community Music Column.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Steve. So I wanted to make sure that everyone saw the news that one of our Rotarians, not an Iowa City Noon Rotarian, but one of our Rotarians worldwide was actually named to the Time 100. His name is Dr. Tunji Funsho, and I apologize if I have said that incorrectly. And he is the chair of Rotary's Nigeria National Polio Plus Committee. And so he's been named to this honor for this year. Each year, Time Magazine names 100 influential people in the world, and he has been included in this. And he's being recognized for his instrumental work with Rotary members and partners to achieve the eradication of wild polio in the Africa region. So I think we can all give a round of applause, or if you want to hit that reaction button at the bottom of your screen, it might be on the top if you're on an iPad, you can give some applause, you can do some thumbs up. I think it's a great accomplishment. He is actually the first Rotary member to receive this honor for his work eradicating polio. So kudos to him, and you can probably watch for that issue of Time Magazine at some point in time. Next, I'm going to go to President-elect Eric Wheeler, who has an announcement. Eric?
Yes, thank you, President Barb. It's great to see everybody virtually. Our annual Rotary Rotary Board elections are coming up. And if you're interested in providing more service to Rotary and be involved with the board, we have 2 openings on the board. And we make the nomination process, the application process as easy as possible. We just ask for 3 sentences from you. First, tell us a little bit about yourself. Second, tell us about your involvement with Rotary Club. And third and finally, tell us why you want to be on the Rotary board. And the application deadline is actually today at 5 o'clock. And in the chat, I will put Barb Thomas's email. We ask that you email those 3 things to Barb. And in the next several days, watch for an email from Rotary, and you'll have the opportunity to see the people who would like to be on the Rotary board and vote on those folks. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you for consideration.
Great, thanks so much, Eric. So do consider it. The Rotary board, the board of our club meets once a month on the 4th Tuesday of the month over the lunch hour. We've been doing it all virtually through Zoom. And it is a 3-year term if you are interested. So we would love that. When you get that email, it will come, through Club Runner from me, and it will be the opportunity to take a survey where you will be voting. So I want to make sure and encourage you all to do that. Don't put it off. Try to do it. We're going to give you 2 weeks to do the vote, but please take care of it as soon as possible. In addition, I wanted to let you know that due to the wild success of our Zoom rooms that we've been having in a couple of our meetings, we are actually going to do our first virtual Rotary Social. And so mark your calendars for Tuesday, October 6th. We will be doing this from 4 to 5:30 p.m. So you could kind of consider it happy hour. And if you'd like to, you can bring your own cold beverage of choice. I will leave that up to you to do. Heck, if you want to bring your own snacks, that's fine, go for it. So we're going to get together. We're going to actually spend some time in Zoom rooms so that we'll have some small group conversations. And on top of it, we have raffle prizes. So thanks to our good friend Ryan Bell, we've got 2 raffle prizes, and there may be even more coming. But you got to play to win, right? So you got to be there to take advantage of that. So again, Tuesday, October 6th, through Zoom, I will again send you another email that will have that Zoom information. So save that so that you can join us. I also, before we move on, I want to make sure that you join us next week at our Rotary meeting, because next week we will hear from Phil Jasper. And Phil is with Collins Aerospace. And I think this is a meeting that could be very interesting for a lot of people, because we all know that Collins Aerospace, which used to be Rockwell Collins, is a company that has gone through quite a bit of change in the last 3 years. And so he's going to give us an overview, talk a little bit about the history, and talk a little bit about the changes in that company. So if you know other people that might be interested in learning a little bit more about Collins Aerospace, please feel free to share the Zoom information with them, and then they can join us for that meeting. Next, I'm going to go for our Rotary moment of gratitude and positivity. And as you know, we've been doing this as a tradition since April when we went virtual, where we asked one of our members to share a positive message. And this week, our positive message.
Am I
You are
on?
on, Doris.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Okay, hold on, Doris. We can't hear you right now. Just hold. Did you?
Now I'm unmuted.
Okay, good.
Okay.
You're good. I can hear you. Go.
And fellow Rotarians. Due to my advanced age and in the interest of making sense, I know you will forgive me for reading my thoughts to you rather than speaking off the cuff. When I was asked to reflect on gratitude and positivity, my habit of giving thanks each morning came to mind. I am blessed with a loving family, good health, and a life fully immersed in music. But I am forever grateful for having been able to spend almost the past 70 years of my life as a Suzuki violin teacher. The Suzuki philosophy and method is as perfect a model of positivity as you can find. I will explain a bit about Suzuki philosophy, which drives his method. Dr. Shinichi Suzuki believed that we are the children of our environment, that our talent is not inborn, but develop environment in order to live and acquire various abilities in the process. Just as a seed can be planted in the ground and then either be carefully tended or left to die, abilities can be nurtured or left to wither. To nurture is to care for and encourage development. It was a privilege for me to forge deep friendships with children through music. As a Suzuki teacher, it was imperative for me to believe that all children have ability and talent can be nurtured, not only in music, but in all aspects of life. We can nurture the abilities of kindness, helpfulness, and understanding in others by our attitudes and the role models we become. Shinichi Suzuki believed that children nurtured this way will grow up to be blessings to our world. I will conclude with Suzuki's words, one's ultimate direction in life is to look for love, truth, virtue, and beauty. Trying to live up to these ideals has given me a beautiful life, and I am grateful.
Thank you, Doris. That is wonderful. And, you know, think about the amazing impact that you have had in all of those years that you have been teaching young people. You know, I think that's part of the reason why we're all Rotarians. We want to have a positive impact, service above self. And I would say that, Doris, you have certainly had a positive impact in our community and our world. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Great. So next we're going to actually have a committee report. So I've asked Anna Moyer-Stone to give us a brief update on the Joint Service Club Luncheon. Miss Anna?
It's that time of year again. Yeah. Okay, it's exciting. So for those of you who have forgotten, every year we have the Joint Service Club Luncheon. This is an annual event that's been going on for probably some 60-some years now, and our club hosts the luncheon. I got wrangled into it a couple years ago by my friend Margaret Reese, who was kind enough to buy me a cup of coffee, and it was like, it's really easy. And so here we are. So how it works is our club, as I say, hosts the event every fall. We invite the other service clubs in the area to join us. Those are your Optimists, the other Rotaries, the Lions Club, etc. And we all get together in the fall, and for probably 15-some years now, we've had the university president speak at the luncheon to kind of give a state of the university address to the local service clubs. So we will be doing that again this year, although this year it will be in November, and we will be doing it via Zoom. So it'll look a lot like this, but instead of me talking, you'll get to hear from President Harold, kind of an update. I'm sure it will be interesting because, as everything has been this year, there's a lot going on and a lot to update us on. So I will be, you won't actually receive sort of an invitation. There will be more information that you'll get in your emails and on the weekly PDFs. And there is also going to be no tickets. So I know you're all very sorry that you won't have to like buy a ticket or have me hound you for a ticket. You won't have to hear about my shoes. You won't have to hear about my vacations. I know, you're all so sorry. So basically all you're gonna do is do the same thing this year that you normally have been doing for the past couple months, signing into Zoom, but instead of seeing my increasingly long hair, you will see President Harold. But if there's anyone who wants to help me in this annual luncheon, we're going to keep doing it. And as I mentioned, Margaret Reese, it's super easy. So just let me know if you're interested and we'll get you on board. Thanks.
Great.
Back to you, Barb.
Hey, thanks, Anna. I don't know, Margaret Reese is retired now, so perhaps you could take her out for coffee and you could say, hey, it's easy, right?
Yes, well, I will fill her Rotary mug and say, hey, Margaret, it's super easy.
Hey, wait a minute.
Whoa.
So of course, this year we will be doing this through Zoom, but in future years, we do need your help with selling those tickets, encouraging the other service groups, helping us with menu selection, helping greet those visitors, etc. So this year it might be a little easier, but next year we're going to need some help. So if you want to work with the fabulous Anna, just let her know, reach out to her, and it's a great, easy way to get involved, right? So next, I'm actually going to turn this over to Bill Oglesby. Bill is going to share one of the videos that Rotary International has prepared. So we're going to get to see a short video from Rotary International. Bill? Okay, Bill.
Muted here? Yeah.
Yep, there you are.
Yeah, Rotary has 6 areas of interest that they want to go into. And I'm going to show you an overview of what those are. So here we go. Okay, that's it, President Barb.
Great, thank you, Bill. So always good to be reminded of those various causes that Rotary supports.
Well, the next ones that we have would be explaining each one of those 6 different areas. So maybe we'll get a chance to see those.
Great, so stay tuned. We've got all kinds of entertainment in our Zoom Rotary meetings. Next, we will move on to our program. So it's my pleasure to ask Dave Bright to come forward and unmute his microphone to make an introduction for our speaker, Jason Taylor. Dave?
Hello, I'm very honored to get to introduce Jason today. I have the privilege of serving on the board of directors at Bur Oak Land Trust and have been for a number of years there. We're always fortunate to have excellent staff that work with us, and Jason is among those. He is our executive director and has previously worked as a land steward for us. He's worked in the natural resources field since he earned his degree at Iowa in 2002, and over the last decade has been working with nonprofits as well. He's a native of Southeast Iowa, where he developed his love of nature, and now he gets to apply it every day at work, and I can say he does an outstanding job, and we're fortunate to have him in the roles that he's had with us, and we look forward to working with him for many more years. So with that, Jason, I turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, David. I'm going to share my screen here because I have a presentation for everyone. You guys run a very professional meeting. I'm impressed. So I'm going to try to keep it up here. So is that good? Everyone can see this? Excellent. Well, thanks again. We have former board members here, current board members, as well as people I used to work with at Kirkwood. So it's fantastic to be able to see everybody. The Bur Oak Land Trust is a nonprofit land trust based out of Iowa City. And as David mentioned, I've been with the organization for a little over 2 years now. One of the interesting things is that a lot of people really don't know much about what land trusts do and what the opportunities they have to, protect land with land trusts, as well as really just to be able to enjoy the environment. And so I always like to take a step back and talk about, what land trusts really are and what it means to be one in Iowa, and then also within the confines of the US. And so there are 6 land trusts that are in the state of Iowa. We're one of 6. And there are about 176,000 acres that are protected in total for across all the land trusts in Iowa. And so some of them are fairly large. Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation is one of the larger ones. A lot of people have heard of them. Of course, the Nature Conservancy has an Iowa chapter. That's the largest of all the land trusts that are in the world at this point in time. We're on the smaller side of that. We have about 800 acres that we help protect, and we have about 12 properties that we actually own. And we maintain those properties. We manage those properties to try to restore them to what we would consider to be a pre-settlement condition. And so the idea there is we want to take it back to what it used to be prior to human intervention. And that allows people to really enjoy nature in a good, healthy ecosystem, whereas you don't see that in a lot of places. And so that's our overall goal. We've been around as a land trust since 1978. So it's a little over 40 years at this point. As I mentioned, 800 acres, 3 counties. And so Washington County, as well as Johnson County, where we have the vast majority of our properties. Then we also have 1 property over in Poweshiek County. The properties that many of you have heard of in the Johnson County area would be the Big Grove property that is out near the what's owned by the county conservation now, where the Schwab-Burford big round barns are out there. We own the Big Grove property out there, which is about 80 acres of just some phenomenal woodland. Turkey Creek Preserve is one of our most popular ones. That's a nice, about 107 acres off of Sugar Bottom Road. There's fantastic trails there. It's great for walking dogs. We do a lot of educational programs that I'll talk about on that property. It's a nice mixture of good prairie. It's a riparian zone with Turkey Creek running through it. It's very close to the reservoir, so we're connected into that ecosystem. It's just a phenomenal property that we've actually, it was one of the first ones that we owned since back in the 80s. And so our whole goal is really focusing on preservation, habitat management, and also trying to get the community involved. It doesn't make any sense to have these, fantastic properties that you're trying to, make good for nature if you don't also provide access for the community. And so every single one of our properties is open to the public. We like to make sure that, everyone understands that they're able to go out onto those properties and again, really get to know nature and enjoy nature, both with their families and also just by yourself. We are a nonprofit, funded by a variety of things, including community support and federal, state, and private grants. One of the biggest things, the biggest impacts that we've had to our program in the last couple of years is this is our 2nd year of having an AmeriCorps program. And I'm sure most of you have either heard of this or some of you may have been involved in organizations that have an AmeriCorps program. So you mentioned earlier this idea of service above self, and that's really the idea behind AmeriCorps as well. And so this is a national service program, addresses, what the needs are for the community. Our focus is on 2 things. One is habitat restoration and land management, and the second is on education. And so really trying to make sure that we have the ability to bolster the environmental education and conservation education for both youth and adults in our community. Another thing that we're able to do with the AmeriCorps program is we're a part of what's called the AmeriCorps Disaster Response Team, which is a national program. And this allows our team to actually respond to natural disasters as they happen across the country. And for the first time ever, for yesterday was our first day, we were actually able to respond. We're part of the FEMA response for the post-derecho cleanup in Cedar Rapids. And so we're part of this national effort to do some of the work up there. And so we have our team up there. Mostly it's a Sawyer team. All of our crew members, as you can see in the pictures, they're adept. We train them on chainsaw usage and things like wood chippers, stuff like that. And so it's perfect skill building for that youth component to be able to help out with some of those disasters. We also were able to go over to the Meskwaki Nation immediately after the derecho and help over there, as well as within the streets of Iowa City as well. I mentioned there's two components, habitat restoration and conservation education. I'll explain about each of those. With the conservation education, we really try to share this with families, and we share this with adults as well. The idea is that you need to make it so that your properties, people feel comfortable going out and actually exploring and enjoying the properties. There is somewhat of a stigma. A lot of people, if they're not used to going out into nature, they really want to make sure they have good trail maps and make sure that they have good access points because they don't feel comfortable otherwise. And so we're doing a lot of work to make sure that we're doing, good trail maintenance, making it so that because some people are very concerned about some of the diseases like Lyme disease, which are, pretty invasive. We also do a number of events. This year, fewer events, but like everybody, we've had to kind of respond to COVID. And so we've done a lot of online programming. We used to do 2 Family Day events that were in person on the properties each year. This year, we're sponsored by the Community Foundation in Johnson County, and we were able to put those events in a digital online format. And so we had a series of videos that would allow families to go on, learn a little bit about some of the properties, use some resources like PDFs that they could download, and then go out and actually do stuff on the land. We also do a lot of volunteer projects. We're still trying to do some of them. We're trying to spin that back up because we know it's incredibly important. We're doing a seed harvest with a company this weekend where people are able to spread out. It's a zero contact type thing, but we're still able to work with some volunteers. And of course, the scouting program has been extraordinarily successful working with us in the past. The other side to it is this idea of really trying to manage the land that we are in charge of. And so in Iowa, that really means 2 things, which is prairie and then oak hickory savanna restoration. That's what the vast majority of Iowa used to be. And I'll show you some maps about, what it used to be versus what it is now and talk about some of the differences there. But in order to really restore and manage these lands, what this means for us is to enhance the vegetation. So make sure that the stuff that's supposed to be there is there. This idea of extirpated species, I promise I won't use too many words that are a little bit foreign, but extirpated species means that they're not extinct. They're just no longer in an area that they used to be native to. And so some of the megafauna that we hear about, so things like elk are an extirpated species, black bear are extirpated species from Iowa, as well as mountain lion. But there are also a number of plant species as well, butterfly species that are extirpated. And so trying to recognize that there are species that should be here that no longer are and trying to reintroduce those. Invasive and non-native species are a massive problem, not just in Iowa, of course, but around the world. And so we do a lot of work to try to remove as many as possible. There's a lot of different things. We don't do a lot of chemical spraying, but there is some treatment, very low residue treatment that we'll actually do on some of the plants to try to prevent them from spreading. And then we've also done some cool stuff. I'll show some pictures of some prescribed grazing that we've done with goats. And then the big thing that we really like to do is what I call managing for the most vulnerable species. And so the idea here is you need to make sure that there are certain species on your properties that have a great chance of going extinct or being extirpated, making sure that you know what's there so that you can manage for them appropriately. And of course, how we do this, there's a lot of techniques. The biggest one is prescribed fire. The most important technique that we have the ability to utilize for Midwestern habitat management is prescribed fire. And so we train our crews up. I was talking to Eric earlier, I teach up at Kirkwood Community College, and I do a prescribed and wildland fire course. And so we get all of our crews certified so they can do not only prescribed fire, but so that they can actually go out west and do wildland fire if they choose to do so. So I often like to explain why this work is so vitally important. I'm passionate about it. As David mentioned, I grew up in nature. I grew up in the country. And so I've always been very passionate about it. A lot of people need a little bit of convincing about why some of these things are necessary, because it does take a lot of work. And there are a couple of reports that came out last year that really emphasize the need for the work that Land Trust, including Bur Oak Land Trust, is doing. The first came out in the journal Nature. And it basically said that around the entire world, we're seeing that plant species are going extinct at a rate that is about 500 times faster than what they normally would expect. And so obviously that is a pretty big concern. There's a UN report that came out and said that in the next 200 years, they're predicting that about 1 million species are going to be threatened with extinction, unless we have some massive changes to the way in which humans interact with their ecosystems. And the problem with that is we don't know where there's going to be those ecological collapses. So you have this web of life idea where everything in an ecosystem is interacting with everything else. And when you start pulling pieces of that web out, we don't have enough knowledge yet to say what's going to happen if these species are removed. And so at some point in time, you'll start to see some ecosystem collapses. So we don't know if that's at 10,000 species, 100,000 species, but it's probably far fewer than 1 million. And so unfortunately, we're having some big issues there. And then something that I know some of you are probably interested in is birding. It's very popular in the Midwest. We have some great migration patterns or migration areas that go through here. Since the early 70s, North America itself has seen a net loss of 3 billion birds just in the last 40 to 50 years. And the vast majority, the large percentage of that decline is in the prairie states within the grassland areas. And so we're seeing just fewer birds. And a lot of people will say you'll go out in nature and you just won't hear birds anymore. And it's definitely true. We're losing a lot of species. So why is this? Why is this actually happening? Right now, there's 3 things that are the greatest threats to the species within Iowa, as well as the rest of the world. And it's kind of covered by habitat loss. And so just removal of habitat from the landscape, fragmentation of that habitat. And so putting roads and sidewalks and splitting properties up can be a very bad thing for management. And then degradation. So things are just, the habitat may still be there, but a prairie that used to be high quality prairie is slowly getting worse over time. So those are the greatest threats. In Iowa, we currently have about 500 species that are listed as either endangered, threatened, or special concern. And these are species that most people have no idea even exist in Iowa. But we have about 3 rattlesnake species. They're all either threatened or endangered at this point in time. The picture on the right there, that's an Opuntia cactus. There's actually 2 native cactus species to Iowa. They both exist in sand prairies. We actually live in Johnson County. There's a sand prairie where there's a nice population of blooming Opuntia cactus that we could probably all drive to in about 30 minutes to get there. It's an amazing site, but most people don't know where it is just because it's kind of remote to get to, but it's a beautiful, beautiful site. And then there's, of course, other plant species. We have 386 plant species that are close to an extirpation because of the habitat fragmentation and loss. The big one in Iowa with water quality is the mussels. We have almost all of the mussel species that were in Iowa or are in Iowa are threatened at this point in time just because they're filter feeders. And if you have a lot of chemicals and stuff in the water, those filter feeders will filter that stuff out and it'll actually start to degrade the population because it'll affect some of the rates at which they're able to reproduce, unfortunately. So why this is happening or how this is happening is this right here. This is a map of Iowa from when prior to the settlement conditions. And so this was around 1830 to 1850s. This is what Iowa looked like. And you can tell all the yellow stuff here is prairie. It was about 90% of the entire state of Iowa was covered with prairie, pretty much from the Missouri to the Mississippi River. The only areas that were wooded in Iowa at that point in time were the riparian zones. You would have these zones that were fairly wet, and fairly wet areas don't burn well. And so that's why you would have trees there. Areas that burned a lot were drier, and all the saplings and stuff that would start to grow up would actually burn off. There are some species that wouldn't burn off, like bur oak species or white oak species that have a very thick bark. But for the vast majority of Iowa, there was not that much timber. Northeast Iowa and Southeast Iowa is a bit of an exception, but for the most part, it was fairly open with prairie. So that's what it looked like about 180 or so years ago. And this is what it looks like now. So considerably different. All the yellow that you see on there is not prairie. All the yellow that you see on there is pasture land. All the gray that you see on there is cropland. And so we took a landscape, we took Iowa, and we converted it from this, which was really designed, this ecosystem was able to support hundreds, if not thousands of species per acre, to this, where 65% of our land in the state is designed now to support one of two species, and that's either corn or soybeans. And so this definitely is not an anti-agricultural talk. We all eat lunch every day and dinner and everything else. And so this is, we need farmers and we need food. But the reality is that we've converted the vast majority of Iowa to cropland. And with that, we've reduced the biodiversity down to a pretty significant loss at this point in time. Urbanization is the other issue that we have within the state of Iowa, but it's pretty minimal when you compare it to the impacts of agriculture. So what this looks like on a micro scale is exemplified with the property that we own that's called the Muddy Creek Preserve. And so this area, for those that are familiar with Coralville, this road right here is 12th Avenue. And so I'm assuming you can see my cursor there. That road is 12th Avenue. And so this is an area that is just north of Coralville and it's just south of North Liberty. The nice thing about Iowa is we have phenomenal maps and photographs from, a long time ago. And so you can see on the left-hand side, this is something called the 1875 Andreas Atlas. And they had people that would go out and design these maps for the entire state of Iowa that would show where all the houses were, all the roads were, but then also where all the savanna was and where all the prairie was. And so pretty much everything in this area was prairie, except where you would have the houses and churches. And this horseshoe-shaped thing right here, this was what they used to show where there was an oak hickory savanna. And so even in 1875, you're starting to see habitat fragmentation because 12th Avenue is this road right here. That road existed in 1875. Obviously not the same, it's changed since then. But you have habitat degradation by having, some houses and things being put up on the land, but there's already starting to be some fragmentation. When you fast forward, you'll see that by 1990, you have a pretty extreme change to the landscape. The vast majority of this area is now agriculture. All of this area right here, this is all ag land. There's some roads, there's a couple houses in here, but not a whole lot. The interesting thing is, though, you can still see there's kind of a modified horseshoe shape here where you still have some area that still is oak hickory savanna. That's very, very important. Fast forward even more to 2016, and everyone knows the Coralville, North Liberty area, it was urbanized. So all of this area right here, these are all houses and sidewalks and parking lots and buildings and things like that. And so there was habitat loss, extreme habitat fragmentation in that area. But again, you can still see there's this nice horseshoe shape, including the area that we own, which is this red shape, which I'll zoom into now. And then we'll talk about what habitat degradation is. So in 1960, this is what this property looked like. It's 40 acres. At the very northern end of it is where Muddy Creek is. This property in 1960 was fairly open. All that light gray stuff was all prairie grass and prairie flowers. And then all those big trees that you see in there, those were mostly oaks, hickories, some cherry trees, and probably some elm and things like that mixed in here and there. By 2010, on the far right, you can see a dramatically different picture. And it's completely forested. If you were to go out there and look up, you would see leaves. It's 100% canopy cover at this point in time. And so a lot of people will say, well, that's a good thing, right? More trees is better. It's the, kind of lungs of the planet type mentality. The problem is that there are a lot of species that would grow up, that evolved to live in an area that looked more like it did in 1960 than it did in 2010. And so for about 10,000 years, it probably looked pretty similar to what it did in 1960 as opposed to 2010. The big change for this property occurred in 1985, and we have this because of some records that we have. But what happened was, it's not the lack of fire. Most people will assume that it's the lack of fire, But the big difference between 1960 and 2010, in 1985, they stopped grazing the land out here. They removed the cattle from this property. And so what that did is it removed the impact of that cattle, and those cattle were a proxy for things like elk and some of the large bison grazers that we used to have in the past. And so that allowed all of those trees just to kind of move into the prairie area, and unfortunately it became completely canopy covered. So what we're doing out there is we're trying to restore this habitat. We're doing a canopy reduction project to try to remove a lot of the trees that should not be there. We're going to be burning this property in the near future, which is pretty exciting. And then we're trying to remove the invasives, but then also bring back the native species that are out there. And this is one of the properties that we were actually able to put goats on to do some removal of shrubby species. It worked pretty well. I learned a whole lot about goats over the about a 6-week period in 2018. They're very interesting, do a great job, but they also kind of do whatever they want to. So it's a little bit tricky to work with goats in an urban setting. But one of the cool things that we're seeing is we're seeing a response to this. We have this idea that if we manage this habitat more appropriately, stuff will start to come back, and we're starting to see that happen. And so on this site, we're actually finding now the species on the left hand of your screen. It's an orchid species. Iowa has 36 native orchid species that grow mostly in a combination of prairie, savanna, and woodland areas. And this species is the lesser lady tress orchid. And before last year, it had never been seen out there. We did a bunch of work, tried to reduce some of the canopy, get more light on the ground, things like that. And we had 86 specimens come up last year. We went through and counted them. This year, we have even more of them come up. And so it's a good response that we're already starting to see that with the efforts that we're doing out there are actually making a pretty good impact. And so just the species on the right are a variety of other orchid species. They're very rare. Almost all orchids in Iowa are threatened or endangered. All of the species on this screen right now you can find them in Johnson County. It's just that they are extremely rare. Most of these we actually have out at our Big Grove property off of Sugar Bottom Road. The other thing that's really interesting that we have at the Muddy Creek property that I was showing is the ornate box turtle. And so this is an extremely rare threatened species in the state of Iowa, and it is Iowa's only terrestrial turtle. So this is a species that will live up to 40, 50 years in the wild, and they may never step foot in water. They don't swim. They can kind of float for a while, but then unfortunately they'll sink and die if they're in too much water. But this is a very unique species, been living in this area for about 10,000 years. And it's adapted to live in areas that are more savanna-like, meaning that there's some shade and that there's also some sun. And so what we're finding is that this species in 1960, they would have a lot of open areas where they can bask. They can go into the sun. They can, when it gets too hot, they'll go into the shade. They burrow in the soil in the winter so that they can hibernate well. Unfortunately, they only mate in areas that they can bask in. And so when you look at in 2010, there's too much tree cover. And so we have a population of turtles that has stopped reproducing because unfortunately they don't have any areas to bask and mate. And so that's one of the reasons that we're trying to reduce a lot of the canopy on that particular property. You may have heard about some of the work that we did with this species. A couple of years ago, we had a guy named John Rucker who came out to this property as well as they did some other work in Johnson County. And John trained a team of Boykin Spaniel dogs to scent on turtles like a lot of dogs will scent on pheasant. And so we worked with John to do a survey on our property as well as another property in Johnson County that has a population of these turtles. It was a phenomenal week. We worked with John all week long. We found about 120 turtles total, including some very, very small baby turtles, which is a good sign. But it was really, really interesting. This was one of the reasons, this was the story that actually got us, we had Kate Payne from Iowa Public Radio join us for a day. And that story actually got picked up by National Public Radio as well. And so we got a pretty good bump in our press regarding the work that we did with the turtles out there. Another project that we've worked on is the work with the endangered rusty patch bumblebee. And so this was the first bumblebee that actually was listed on the endangered species list, happened 2 years ago. About 90% of this population has declined in the last two decades. And so we're really seeing this where if nothing is done, we're going to have an extinction on our hands. What the interesting thing about this species, my house is, I live fairly close to like the City High area in Iowa City. And the first time I actually saw a rusty patch bumblebee, I was out in my yard drinking coffee on a Sunday morning, just looking at some prairie plants. And I saw one of these rusty patch bumblebees on one of my flowers. And so I took a picture, got it confirmed. And then that led me thinking, like, you know, we have all this other property with Bur Oak Land Trust. I guarantee we have some other species or other populations. And so we went out and found on just the Bur Oak properties, we found rusty patch bumblebee populations and endangered species on 5 of the properties that we have in Johnson County. And so we were able to actually get those listed. This shows with the Fish and Wildlife, they have a high potential zone. It provides a little bit more protection to them. Through the work that we were able to do with some volunteers at Bur Oak Land Trust, we were actually able to get a lot of Johnson County listed with the Fish and Wildlife Service as a zone for rusty patch bumblebees, which was really, you know, just great work. And then the last project I'll mention, this is something we're going to be doing out at Turkey Creek Preserve. There's a species of swallowtail butterfly that's called a zebra swallowtail. Most people have never seen them. They're fairly rare in Iowa. And the problem is that they only eat one thing. And so they're very specialist as a caterpillar, and that is the pawpaw tree. And so the leaves of a pawpaw is the only thing that the zebra swallowtail will eat. And most people in Iowa now have never really seen or heard of a pawpaw tree. They're phenomenal. It's the largest native fruit in North America. They have a pretty large zone that really does come up into the Johnson County area. And so what we're doing is to try again to reintroduce this extirpated species. We're planting pawpaws on our properties with the goal of bringing back the zebra swallowtail. And so there are a couple of people that I've been working with, individuals in Johnson County that are doing it on their properties as well. And we actually have sightings of zebra swallowtails in Johnson County now. Unfortunately, not on the Bur Oak properties yet, but we're hoping to get them in the very near future. So that's the presentation. If anyone has any questions or wants to learn any more information, you know, I do tours. We can still do one-on-one tours out on our properties. If anyone's interested in contacting me, my email is up there, and then our website is up there as well. We really do enjoy working with all sorts of groups. And so if you have other groups that are interested in hearing what we're doing or want to meet us out on the properties for a tour, I definitely encourage you to let me know.
Wonderful. Well, we have a couple of minutes for questions. So if anybody has a question, if you'd like to raise your hand in the participants box, please do so. Jason, if you want to stop sharing your screen, then we'll just see you.
There we go.
And you can also put maybe the web address into the chat as well. I did have a question myself. How do we access like trail maps or information on where we could go to, you know, hike and experience these properties?
Yep. So on our website, we actually have a tab that says properties, and it will give the address to all the properties. And we're actually working with our AmeriCorps team to update our trail maps as well. And so we're going to be putting out, our first one is going to be a trail map for Turkey Creek, just because it's so popular. And we're actually going to be sending that. We have a quarterly newsletter basically called Heritage, and we're going to be sending that out this year. And so I can definitely make sure to get some contact information so we can give that those trail maps to people. That's probably our best property to start with, Turkey Creek Preserve. Really good trails, very easy, relatively flat in most areas, and also just a beautiful place to be this time of year.
That's great. We also have a question from Alyssa. Alyssa, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Let's see, Alyssa. Did Alyssa disappear?
I think so, but Ryan has a question now.
Great, Ryan.
I'm just curious, like as a homeowner, what are maybe 2 or 3 things that you can do on your property with limited space or whatever restrictions you have to help with the native species?
Yeah, so the best thing to do is to try to help pollinators. They're the species that are the most impacted right now by a lot of the stuff that's happening. And so there are things like herbicide and pesticide drift that is really impacting the species pretty bad, like butterflies, bees, things like that. The best thing to do is to plant a couple native species. The one that I always suggest to people is called bergamot, B-E-R-G-A-M-O-T. It's a Monarda species, and it's the best single food for bee species. It provides them with a lot of good amino acids, and it's also really good for rusty patch bumblebees. So I would say planting bergamot is a good thing. Joe pieweed is another. But then it's also, and I'd like to encourage people not to mow too much. Bumblebees are solitary species, so they actually form colonies underground. And if you mow too much, you can impact their hives. They're not like the honeybees. Honeybees are not native. They're somewhat of an invasive species at this point in time. And so they don't form colonies like the honeybees do. And so we try to encourage some of the solitary and the bumblebees.
Excellent, thanks. So Jason, we did have a question. If you could put the names of some of those plant species that people should plant in their yards into the chat. That way we can make sure that other people can kind of take note of that. I know I've seen bergamot in, when I've gone to garden stores. I can't really tell you what it looks like, but I know I've seen it.
Yep, it's a good one. And then, of course, if anyone has, I have my email in there. We have plant lists that we can send out as well. And there are definitely some that are better for urban areas and, do a little bit better in the yard areas.
Perfect. Well, great. Jason, I really want to thank you for taking the time today to present to our club. It was a fascinating presentation, and I think I learned a lot, and I really salute your efforts to help keep certain species from being extirpated.
There you
How
go.
about that, huh? Use the new word. I think all of us can try. Here's your task for everyone. Try to use the word extirpated in your day-to-day language today. Word for the day, extirpated. So Jason, in appreciation for your talk today, our club will actually make a $10 donation to Rotary International's Polio Plus program. And every donation to that program is actually matched 2-to-1 by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And so that $30 that will go to this effort in your name will actually provide 70 vaccinations for polio. So we will do that in your honor and appreciation. So thank you very much for being a part of our program today.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So if there is no other business before the club, I ask you all to unmute and join me in the 4-way test. Of all of the things that we think, say, or do, is this the truth, fair to all concerned, build goodwill and better friendship, will be beneficial to all concerned. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. So thank you all. Make sure you mark your calendars. Next week is Collins Aerospace, and October 6th, we're going social. So please join us for that as well. Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.